The world of cricket has some bad news this week. The International Cricket Council has decided to suspend Zimbabwe owing to the fact that there is political intervention in the way cricket is administered there. The member countries in the ICC came together and unanimously decided that it is time to suspend Zimbabwe's membership for a while because they believe that the country and the cricket board is not capable of holding free, fair and democratic elections on its own. Now, what are the implications of this suspension on Zimbabwe? What does this mean for cricket in the country? What does this mean for their participation in ICC events? Now, these are all some of the questions that we're going to be answering today. Right from the time Robert Mugabe was in power, there have been issues coming up and down, and it's been like an ECG of sorts as far as Zimbabwe's stint in the cricketing world is concerned. Now, let's not consider this to be all gloom and doom, but it's easier to understand why Zimbabwe and why all of us stand at this stage if we look at Zimbabwe's history in a sort of a timeline. Now, if you cut to 1999, the World Cup there, Zimbabwe really made heads turn around by sort of triggering two really brilliant upsets. They beat India and South Africa in that World Cup, and it sort of got people to sit up and take notice of this team. But then in the 2000s, like when you enter that the second millennium, things sort of going downhill for them. Cut to 2003, the World Cup in South Africa. South Africa was asked to host this World Cup, but then they decided to share a couple of the matches with Kenya and Zimbabwe. Now, because of the political unrest that was on in this country, a lot of cricket-playing nations did not want to go there and play, particularly England and the likes of Australia. England outright forfeited their match, but Australia went there and ended up beating Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwean cricket team was made of people like you and me who, this was uncomfortable for everybody involved, the sort of state of the politics in the nation and how that was getting into everybody's careers. And two players particularly didn't want to take this lying down. Andy Flower, who now we all know as a very successful coach, and Henry Olonga, who we know from the video of him singing that sort of went viral a couple of months ago. Both of them decided to wear black armbands in protest. They wanted to protest the death of democracy. They wanted to mourn the death of democracy. And this didn't go down very well with ICC because ICC very strictly wants to remain apolitical. But then it sort of garnered a lot of international praise. A lot of people started sort of taking notice of the fact that this country was going through something. Both Andy Flower and Henry Olonga had to leave the country. They are now settled in the United States. Henry Olonga, in fact, was kicked out of the club that he was playing for. His girlfriend dumped him, rumors are supposed to say. So it wasn't very comfortable for either of these players to sort of take a stand, but that's exactly what ended up happening. In 2004, the board dismissed the incumbent captain, Heath Streak, because he had come and approached the board with some of the grievances that the players had. Now, this didn't go down well with his teammates, and about 15 to 16 people quit at the same time. This left Zimbabwe with its second string players that they would now field against any team that sort of comes to play them in their country or when they travel out. So obviously their rankings took a hit, their sort of win record took a hit. And it's not just that, it's also that ICC was seeing that there were problems and they sort of effected a test suspension for Zimbabwe at that point. So from 2004 to 2005, Zimbabwe did not play a single test match. They came back in 2005 to play about 8 test matches, after which the next one that they would go on to play would be in 2011, a whole 6 years later. In 2005, just when things were starting to come back on track, at least a little bit, Zimbabwe had an abysmal season when they sort of went and played New Zealand. It was horrible because they lost by really big margins, and Phil Simmons, the coach at that point, was asked to leave. Players very categorically wrote a letter saying we denounce the decision, and this sort of made the rift between the players and the administration very, very obvious to the entire cricket playing world. Between 2009 and 13, monetary issues for the Zimbabwean Cricket Board sort of escalated in ways they were not prepared to deal with. Zimbabwe had taken loans from local authorities and from the ICC, and they were not able to pay any of these back. They didn't have any assets, they did not own any of their stadiums. At points, they didn't even have money to pay their own players. And these were sort of some very basic issues that came in the way of how this board functioned. It came to a point where I think the ICC had given out about 70 to 80 million US dollars as loans and funding for the Zimbabwean Cricket Board, but they did not do anything about it. So they had nothing to show back. You have all of these issues, but your basic infrastructure, your basic facilities were not sorted. And without that foundation, irrespective of how much help was sent their way, Zimbabwe still remained wobbly. Cut to 2019 now, Obviously, Zimbabwe did not qualify for the 2019 Cricket World Cup, and as a measure to deal with that, the government appointed Sports and Recreation Committee dissolved the Zimbabwean Cricket Board, and they put in an interim board that they had sort of selected. This blatantly went against the constitution of the ICC, which very categorically demanded that no political intervention come in the way of how a cricketing board is administered. All the member countries came together and decided that it was time to sort of hit the brakes, not just because it's frustrating for them to look at as member countries, but also because Zimbabwe needs to find answers. This was also a time when there were a lot of corruption charges being leveled against several authorities. A couple of them were banned for match fixing, a couple of them were banned for breaching the code of conduct. This suspension is sort of a wake-up call for this country to just sit up and notice its problems and try and do something right from the root. Now we need to understand that when ICC suspends somebody, it automatically means that the sanction is going to have a couple of repercussions. Now the first and probably the most important thing as far as Zimbabwe is concerned is that this cuts away the funding that ICC provides. So this basically means that ICC will no longer be making money available for Zimbabwe. Personally, I'm not sure how good an idea this is because we know Zimbabwe needs money. Perhaps the way it's being made available to them was not the right way. Perhaps it could trickle down in installments rather than being given as like a bailout package altogether. But either way, as things stand right now, ICC funding to Zimbabwe has been cut. The other thing is that Zimbabwe will not be able to participate in any ICC event unless the suspension is sort of taken away. So this puts their participation in the men's T20 and the women's World T20 in doubt because they're not going to be able to participate, they're not going to be able to do anything. And a situation like this where overnight players, coaches and all these staff members have sort of lost their jobs is only going to pressurize the board all the lot more. India, England and Australia are countries that wield a lot of power in the ICC. Is there a way that they can step in and help Zimbabwe? That's something India will, not just India, all these three countries will have to take a call on. India was supposed to be meeting Zimbabwe later this year. They were going to have a home series against them. Now they're going to have to take a call about whether that's going to go on at all. The other thing would be to sort of figure out whether cutting away monetary help is the way to go. Like I mentioned before, maybe you should just trickle down the funds, or maybe you should just take one separate sector, like maybe paying player salaries under the ICC. All we know is that the drawbridges have been lifted and Zimbabwe is sort of on its own. These decisions were basically made at an ICC conference that was held in London right after the Cricket World Cup is done. And this was not the only decision that was taken, and this was not the only board that has been reprimanded. Morocco, Croatia have also come under the line, come under fire because of the fact that they've not adhered to the constitution. There has been non-compliance of rules and they also face suspension. But Zimbabwe is the first full member to be suspended. The only other nations were associate members like Nepal and the likes. For a country that's capable of such brilliant cricket, it's kind of sad that your destinies have to come and hit a bureaucratic logjam such as this one. Political intervention, political interests have always dominated how cricket works in Zimbabwe, and it's probably about time that someone comes and cleans the entire thing up. I hope this video helped you understand what the ICC suspension is all about, and I hope you understood what this means for cricket in Zimbabwe itself. For all you need to know from the world of sport, head over to www.sportstar.thehindu.com. Until next time, it's bye-bye.